So far, we've seen how we can create a computation by calling the autorun method and rerunning our computations function by calling its invalidate method. Now we're going to take a look at how a reactive data source can keep track of multiple computations by using a dependency. I found this explanation to be a little bit confusing, so I think it's best to illustrate how a dependency works by looking at an example. To create a new dependency, I can call new deps.dependency. I'll assign this to a variable called dep, and I won't use the var keyword so that we can play with it in the browser debugger. If I jump over to the debugger and I type dep, we can take a look at the resulting object. The first thing to note is this property called _dependence_by_id. This is for tracking a list of computations, and we'll look at this again in a minute. In the prototype object, you can see a few methods that we can call on the dependency, like changed, depend, and hasDependence. We're going to be looking at the depend and changed methods in this episode. We call the depend method on a dependency to add a computation to the dependency's list of computations. So to start us off in our code, let's create a computation by calling deps.autorun and passing a function as a parameter. Inside of this computation, I can call dep.depend. It's able to get the current computation because the current computation is a global variable stored on deps. We can access it by calling deps.currentComputation. But this happens for us automatically, simply by calling the depend method of our dependency. Inside of this computational function, I'm going to just write a console log, and we'll say this is our first computation function. Now, dependency can track multiple computations, so let's create another computation. We'll call the autorun method and pass another function. And we'll call the depend method of our dependency again. And this time we'll do a console.log and say this is the second computation function. When we look in the browser debugger and when the code refreshes, you can see that first computation function is run and we print our string to the console, and then the second computation function is run. And both of these computations are now stored in our dependencies list of computations. So let's type out dep in the debugger and take a look at the object. And now if I expand dependence by ID, you can see that there are two dep computations stored. The key is the ID of the computation, and the value is the computation object itself. Now that our dependency has two computations in its list, we can call methods on the dependency that affect all of these computations. For instance, we can call the changed method on the dependency object, and that will cause each of the computations to be invalidated. I'll call the changed method on the dependency, and you'll see that each of our computation functions are rerun on the next flush. So hopefully you can see that from within a computation, if we call the depend method, it adds the computation to the list of computations that are stored in this private property called dependence by ID. And if we call the changed method on a dependency, it causes each of these computations to be invalidated. And then on the next flush, the computations functions will be rerun. Using a dependency to store computations makes it really easy for a reactive data source to almost automatically track which computations and which functions rely on that data source, and then calling just one method on the dependency, invalidating all of the computations at once if the data source changes. And in another episode, we'll take a look at how to create a reactive data source from scratch.